Hi friends, I'm excited to share a new layout with you today for the Vicki Boutin design team. I have a new challenge up in the Vicki Boutin Creative Community, and the challenge is going to be to pick 3 colors. So for this layout, I am going to be focusing on pink, green, and blues. And I went through all of the Flower Emporium collection, all of the different patterned papers that I have, and I like the 6x8 papers, and also the 12 by 12 paper pads and the extra sets of paper that you can get. And I picked out all of the beautiful pinks and greens and blues that I thought would work well together. And then I used a circle punch, and my circle punch that I'm using is 1 3/4 inch. So it's just under 2 inches. And I punched a bunch of circles, and then I distressed the edges of each of those. And then I cut them in half, and I'm going to be creating rows or lines of color going across the page using those circles. So here I'm just cutting them in half, getting everything ready. And then I knew I wanted all of the colors, these 3 main colors that I'm using, to be in their own kind of sections, tone on tone. And so I started with the blue at the bottom, and I'm pretty sure that is chipped sapphire is the color that I used. And then I pulled out a bunch of Vicki Boutin stencils from her past collections and added on some different shapes and different images as I went in each color section. So I've got some hearts from the mixed media collection, and it was also from one of her that stencil was in 2 different collections, that heart stencil that I love so much. And then I had one that was just like random images, and then I'm going to be using also one of her exclusive stencils that is just circles. It's kind of like irregular circles. So I'm adding those on just here and there. This is her exclusive stencil right there. It's one of my favorite stencils, those circles. I'm not adding a whole lot of interest on the final, like you're not going to see all of this on the final layout, because I'm going to be adding the patterned paper and little strips of color and some ribbons and some hand stitching across. So you will not see this in its entirety on the final layout for sure, but you do see it kind of poking through. So if you notice there, I did sprinkle some water on the blue and green section as I was going, just to kind of lift up some of that color and add some visual interest. I will probably be the only one that ever notices that on the final layout. It's not something that you really see, but it's something that I love to do when I'm using distress oxides, because it definitely looks like you're adding color in layers when you do that as you go. The green is mowed lawn, and then the pink is picked raspberry. And I'm just using the inks on top of themselves. So I'm not using any different color inks for these. It's just the 3 colors of ink. And then I'm going to start with the papers, the patterned papers. And I did, with a layout like this, it is important to make sure that your rows are straight as you go. So I am going to be using my T-square ruler to make sure that all of my rows are going the right direction. And then that stencil, if you're noticing that I kind of have a black marking up in the corner, I always mark my stencils so that when I go back and use them, like if I'm doing like a 2-layered thing or a 3-layered thing, I always want to know what direction my stencil was. So I try to mark my stencils. That one says VB because it's Vicki Boutin, and it's up in the right-hand corner. So I always know when I use that stencil, that's where it needs to go, so that if I go back and try to add something again, I can find where my images were. I've lots of times used a stencil and then not been able to, or had a really hard time lining it back up if I need to add again. So it's just a little trick there that I use. And then for these circles, I am only adding adhesive. You kind of can't see because it's off screen in just a little bit, but I'm only adding adhesive on the tops, like the flat edge of the circles, because I am going to, or the half circles, because I am going to go back and kind of lift those up to make sure that they add great texture and dimension to the layout. And then I added a pencil mark with my T-square ruler, and that pencil mark will be covered up by the edges of the half circles as I glue them down. So these are definitely not perfect because I didn't, when I was cutting the circles, you know, I just kind of eyeballed where the middle of them was. So some of them are a little bit, you know, they're not exactly square, exactly right. So they do look a little bit wonky when I put them down, and I love that. And that's okay. As long as mainly they're going straight across the page. That part would be pretty important in a layout like this. And then I did pull some ribbons from my stash. So I pulled out some navy blue ribbon and some green and some pink. And I tried to do, like, this navy one that I'm adding right now is just a very simple, plain, kind of, I think it's like maybe a 1/4 inch, maybe an 1/8 of an inch navy blue ribbon. It's very thin and it's very plain. It's satin. I would say it's satiny. But then the other ribbons that I picked to add more texture and dimension as I add those. And then I did a couple of little very skinny strips of paper. So I just, as thin as I could get them, I trimmed those to add another little layer. And then I added some light blue, and then I started on the green section, and then the green ribbon that I used, I don't even know if you would call it a ribbon. It's more like a trim. It's a tinsel. It's almost like a tinsel, but it's like a woven tinsel ribbon or or trim. I don't know, but it's very rough and very shiny and shimmery. So I added that in between those green half circles. And then as I was doing the half circles, I did kind of vary where I started them. So some are squared all the way over to the right edge, some are on the left edge, and then some I tried to kind of start with it hanging off the page so that I could cut it so that they would be, I didn't want all of my half circles straight in a line up and down the page. I wanted them to be varied. So you have to start them in different places to make them, you know, end up in different places. So if you look, they are not lined, none of them, I tried to make sure none of them were lined up, up and down the page. And then like the last green row that I added right before this pink row, you can see I started with it hanging off on the right side. So then the pink, I started on the left side because I wanted it to be opposites as I went. And then this is another cute little trim, almost like a scalloped puffy ribbon. And then some of those I did add a staple to, and some I just glued down. And then up above the photos, where the photos are going to go, I'm going to add my rub-ons. And if you notice, if you use rub-ons a lot, you know this, and you know it's helpful to cut out the rub-on that you're going to be using off of the page. I learned that very early on when I started using rub-ons on layouts, that it's very helpful if you leave the backing sheet on the rub-ons and then you only cut out, like right now I'm cutting out a couple of flowers out of the sheet before you try to put it on the background. Otherwise you're gonna get images that you're not wanting to get kind of all mixed together. So make sure you cut that out. And then I just rubbed those onto the background. And 49 and Market, I think they're notorious for having wonderful rub-ons. So they go on easily. You don't really have to fight with them, but you do want to, as you're putting them down, you do kind of want to pull up the edge just a little bit at a time to make sure that everything is good and stuck down. And even though they're really great quality rub-ons, I always have to go back and like a couple little places, you know, rub again to make sure that they're really good and stuck down. Here I'm taking Cosmic Watercolors in the 3 main colors and just adding some splatters. It was a little clean for me, so I wanted it to look a little bit more layered and messy. And then I pulled out embellishments from the different ephemera sets. And I pulled out some that were pink, but I've used a lot of the pink flowers. So now I've got a lot of like creamy colored flowers left. So I just used my Cosmic Watercolors to paint them pink. And then I will paint those leaves green. And that's quick and easy to do. Some of the flowers I did go back, I think, with the Sharpie off camera and add some of the lines back in, but it did a pretty good job of the ink, the black ink that's on those flowers does a pretty good job of wicking away the color. So that was a good, fun little addition. And then my photos, I glued down, or I matted them on white. And then I added craft foam behind them. And I just kind of did the craft foam around the ribbon. So like where that pink ribbon runs through, it's pretty thick. So I didn't do craft foam over that part. Otherwise, I would have gotten a ridge in my photo where the ribbon runs. So I did craft foam below where the ribbon is on the back of the photo and above, so that there was just kind of a little blank spot through the middle of the photos for that ribbon to run. Then I glued that down. And then I'm going to be creating a cluster down in the bottom right. And you saw I added some tangled thread in there. And then I'm going to create a little cluster in the top left of the photos, and then that butterfly in the top right corner. And I am popping up on craft foam as I go, because the photos are up on craft foam. So for everything to be kind of at different levels, I'm using different sizes of different thicknesses of craft foam. And for the tangled thread, I just used green, the closest green that I had to the greens in the collection. And then same thing with the pink, the closest pink that I had to the brighter color pink. And then here I am going to go and add hand stitching across just the areas that have the half circles. So I poked a hole in the middle of each, at the top middle of each half circle, and did long stitches going through all of those circles. And I matched the embroidery threads to the colors on the back, or the colors of the paper, as close as I could. And then now I'm going to add my title. This is from the puffy sticker sheet from Flower Emporium. And with titles, as always, I start with the end in mind. So I always start where I want them to finish. So I started with day and glued that down, and because I knew where I wanted it to go in relation to the floral cluster. So I started there, and then I moved over and glued down the first word. So it's going to say, my title is just going to be Good Day. And I love these sweet photos of my husband and I. We were at a wedding for his stepsister, and I loved the colors in the photos, and it was such a sweet night because we left my kids with my parents and went away for the weekend, which we don't ever do. I think this was only the second time we'd ever left them, and my son is 11. So it was fun. And then here I pulled out my box. I've been getting lots of questions about this box of embellishments. So this was not a set that I bought. This was one that I created myself. So all of the crystals and half pearls and blings in there are from Buttons Galore and More. And then the box is from Container Store. And I purchased each color individually and then filled it up in rainbow order. And then here I'm adding pops of color in 2 different shades of pink, adding some detail to the middle of the flowers, and then also just a little bit around the clusters and on the butterfly. And here is some close-up video so you can see. My glue is not quite dry in the middle of those flowers, so it will dry clear. But there it is. And then I'm going to pull up all of those little half circles because I only added adhesive at the top, and now they're sewn down, so they're good and permanent. So I'm going to go and bend those up so they add some good texture. And then here is the final layout. So I hope that you enjoyed the process. If you have not started subscribing to my new channel, this channel that I'm sharing this on, I would love that if you did. And let me know what you think of the layout. If you have any questions, I do have the challenge for June up in the Vicki Boutin Creative Community on Facebook, and I hope that you will check that out and join in the challenge for picking 3 colors for a project. And I hope you have a great day. Bye, guys.